Hello! While the potatoes are baking for the gnocchi, I decided to start on the sauce. So we chopped up whatever vegetables we had in the kitchen. So we had some carrots, some onions, some zucchini, some peppers, and so now just sauteing the vegetables and putting in the ones that take longer to cook, like the carrots and the onions first. Let them cook for about 5 minutes, and then tossed in the peppers and zucchini. But it's whatever you have on hand, and if you don't have fresh vegetables, you can use frozen vegetables or canned vegetables. If you don't like vegetables, you don't have to put them in the sauce. This just makes it a heartier sauce and gives it some extra flavor. I have a bowl of some already peeled potatoes, and I'm peeling some right now. When you're making gnocchi, it's really important that you bake the potatoes and that you don't boil them or put them in the microwave, because you need the inside of the potato to still be a little moist, and it still has to have that moisture. So what I did was I'm making a double batch, but you would take 2 pounds of potatoes and you would scrub them. You would puncture the skin a few times with a fork, put them in an oven at 400 degrees, and leave them in there for about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on the size of potatoes. These are smaller potatoes, so they only took 45 minutes. And you want to be able to get a fork through them completely, because they need to be soft through and through. And this is actually my least favorite part of making gnocchi, which is peeling the potatoes. If they are baking potatoes and have a thicker skin, the skin comes off easier. These have a very thin skin, so I'm using the side of a spoon to peel them. With a thicker skin potato, you can actually use a spoon to just scoop out the potato like so. And if you're really, really ambitious, you could stuff the potato skins, if you are able to keep them in one piece, with some cheese and bake them in the oven until the cheese melts. So now I'm taking a potato masher and I'm mashing the potatoes. So it's important that you mash the potatoes by hand, because if you were to use something like a food processor, you end up getting really, really sticky potatoes that are too smooth, and that ends up making sticky gnocchi, and it doesn't hold together properly. So you mash it until it's the consistency of mashed potatoes. And then once it's mashed, we're going to start to mix in the other ingredients. You're going to mix in olive oil. If you don't have olive oil, you can use vegetable oil or canola oil. Don't use coconut. It has to be liquid at room temperature. And you're going to mix in 2 tablespoons. I doubled the recipe, so I'm going to be putting in a little extra. And you're going to mix in about half a teaspoon of salt. Mix in a little more, a little less. Depends on what you like. So now, pouring in half the flour. So if you're using a single recipe, it is 1 1/2 to 1 3/4 of a cup of flour. And you put in half. And then you're going to stir it all up. So now is the fun part. You want to flour your hands so it doesn't stick to your hands. And you're going to knead the dough with your hands. You can also do this on a floured countertop if you don't have a gigantic bowl like this one. Just Just make sure you wash your countertop first. And it's still sticky. So I'm going to put in more flour. So you want to keep mixing in the flour until the dough is no longer sticky, and you want to make sure it's all mixed together, and then form it in a ball. And we're going to cover it with some plastic wrap or some foil, and then put it in the fridge for half an hour so it rests. Alright, after your gnocchi dough has sat in the fridge for half an hour, you want to take a clean surface, put flour on it. You can put flour on your hands, it will help prevent the dough from completely sticking to your hands. And put a little bit of flour on the dough, and you're going to roll it out, like so. You're going to roll it. So one trick is to separate the dough. So separate it into 2 or 3 balls. You can even make it into smaller balls depending on how much surface space you have to work with. Your counter space determines the size of your dough balls. And then you just keep rolling it. You want it to be about ½ an inch thick. Like so. And if you have some little chunks of potato in there, don't worry about it. And then you're going to take a knife and cut them into pieces that are maybe about an inch. Like so. So we're about to get to my favorite part. Just keep cutting away. If you leave the dough in the fridge a little too long, it does get a little stickier. And if that happens, it will get less sticky as you roll it in the flour. You can get a fancy gnocchi roller, or you can use a fork. Down the fork. Sometimes they fall apart a bit, that's okay. Just put a little bit of flour on that one. Roll it down the fork. And these ridges help the sauce stick. So one side's going to have your thumbprint on it, the other side is going to have the ridges from the fork. That one's a little sticky. Roll in some flour. Like so. They don't have to look perfect. I mean, once you eat it, it's all going to look the same anyway. And keep doing this until they are all rolled. So you're going to want to liberally salt the water. So I put in maybe about 1 or 2 teaspoons of salt in a pot, and you're going to drop the gnocchi in. You don't want to overcrowd it. You want to make sure that there's room for each of them on their own. You kind of crowd it a little bit. There we go. You want to wait for it to come to a bit of a boil before you pop them in carefully. And as it's boiling, it doesn't boil for very long before it's ready. So you let it boil for about 2 minutes or so, or until it starts floating. And then once it starts floating, you need to count to about 60 and start pulling it out because you don't want to overcook them. Okay, so it started floating about 55 seconds ago. So I'm going to start taking them out. You want to use a slotted spoon if you have one. And if you don't, you can get one at the dollar store for really cheap. They're just great to have in general. So as you can see, I couldn't fit the whole batch in at once because you don't want them to stick together, and you also want to make sure that you take them out a minute, at most a minute after they start floating. And you're going to want to put sauce on them as soon as you take them out to prevent them from sticking together. So I'll show you that in a moment once I get these last few pieces out. There we go. So I will not put that on the element where it will burn. There we go. So just pour a little bit of the sauce in there, and as you can see, we put some beans in here to add some protein. Beans are an inexpensive source of protein, and if they're canned, you don't have to cook them first or anything. You just open the can, drain it, rinse them off, and put them in to the sauce. So this will prevent them all from getting sticky.
Hey Derek, how's the gnocchi?
Very delicious.